You have felt it, though you rarely name it. The quiet pressure inside your chest, when you realize that life is not happening on the surface, where everyone else seems so comfortably distracted, but in the silent depths, where your thoughts echo louder than any voice in the room, where your awareness becomes almost too sharp, too honest, too revealing, as though you were never meant to see this clearly. And maybe that's the first paradox you encounter, the one no one warns you about. The more awake you become, the harder it is to speak, because language suddenly feels too small for what you know, and the world seems too loud for what you feel, and you start sensing a strange truth, that strong people do not explain themselves, not because they lack something to say, but because what they carry cannot be translated into words without breaking the delicate understanding they've built within themselves. So you watch, quietly, gently, as life unfolds in front of you, and you begin to notice the invisible currents beneath every expression, every insecurity, every attempt people make to belong or be admired or be forgiven. And you start to wonder, when did we begin performing life instead of living it? When did we trade authenticity for approval, clarity for noise, truth for comfort? And in that wondering, a small tension forms inside you, a soft pull, like a thread coming loose from the edge of a fabric, inviting you to tug, to uncover, to see what unravels if you follow it deeper. And so part one dissolves naturally into the next moment, into the slow revealing of the everyday illusion you've been walking through for years without even noticing. Because most people live asleep with their eyes open, and you can see it now with almost painful clarity. The way conversations drift like empty boats on the surface of a lake, carrying nothing real beneath the words. The way people laugh just a little too loudly at jokes that aren't funny, as if trying to cover the sound of something cracking inside them. The way workplaces become stages where everyone plays a character they didn't choose, rehearsing lines they don't believe in, fearing that one honest moment might collapse the entire script. The way families sit together at dinner tables yet remain worlds apart, each person holding unspoken stories behind forced smiles, everyone pretending they're fine because that's what makes the world easier to manage, tidier, more predictable. And if you look closely, if you let your awareness stretch across these ordinary moments, you notice a subtle desperation clinging to everything, like fog on a window pane, blurring and distorting the truth of who we are. Because beneath the illusion, no one wants to admit they feel lost or lonely or tired of pretending. They just keep going, scrolling, smiling, nodding, performing the life they think they're supposed to live. You see it at social gatherings where people trade surface-level observation like currency, terrified of silence because silence might reveal something real. You see it in grocery store aisles where strangers avoid eye contact, as if acknowledging one another might create a responsibility they are too drained to carry. You see it in friends who talk about everything except the things that matter, circling their wounds without ever touching them, afraid that being truly seen might unravel the fragile identity they stitch together every morning before stepping into the world. And the more you observe, the more you realize that this illusion isn't malicious. It's simply habitual, a collective coping mechanism inherited across generations, a shield against the vulnerability of authenticity. And yet, once you notice it, you cannot unsee it. It becomes a kind of quiet background hum in your awareness, reminding you that the world runs on stories. People tell themselves to avoid the discomfort of truth. And maybe this is where the second paradox appears. The stronger and more aware you become, the less inclined you are to participate in these illusions, not because you judge them, but because you finally understand them. And once you understand something deeply, it becomes impossible to pretend you don't. You start moving differently, speaking differently, choosing differently. You stop justifying your feelings, stop explaining your decisions, stop defending your boundaries because you know your clarity is not up for negotiation. And it's in this shift, subtle yet profound, that the awakening begins, the quiet turning of your inner compass towards something truer, something quieter, something that pulls you out of the noise and into yourself. But you're not there yet, not fully. And that's why the tension from part one still lingers like a soft vibration under your ribs, guiding you into the next layer of awareness, where the everyday illusion becomes the catalyst for a deeper realization, a strange and beautiful awakening that you didn't choose consciously but somehow walked into, simply because you couldn't bear to live half asleep anymore. And maybe, without noticing, you've already begun stepping into that revelation, the moment when the world starts revealing more than you asked for, and your mind, tired of pretending, begins to open like a window after a long winter. And then it happens, not dramatically, not with thunder, not with some cinematic flash of enlightenment, but quietly, almost imperceptibly, like a thin crack appearing in a mirror that has reflected the same version of yourself for years. You wake up one morning and something feels different, not wrong, but unfamiliar, like your mind has been rearranged overnight by an unseen hand, and you begin noticing the world with an intensity that borders on uncomfortable. The conversations you once tolerated now feel hollow. The routines you once depended on feel suffocating. The goals you once chased feel strangely disconnected from the person you are, slowly becoming. And this awakening, this subtle shift in inner gravity, pulls you deeper into yourself in a way that both unsettles and liberates you. You realize you're no longer able to lie to yourself about the things that drain you, the relationships that distort you, the environments that shrink you. Your intuition, once a faint whisper, grows louder, clearer, sharper, cutting through your old patterns like a blade through silk, guiding you towards something you cannot yet name, but instinctively trust. And though this clarity feels new, there's a haunting familiarity to it, as if you've always known this truth, but were too afraid to see it. You start recognizing the quiet manipulations in people's words, the emotional patterns playing out beneath their reactions, the fears hiding behind their anger, the longing beneath their pride, the fragility behind their cruelty. And this awareness sits heavily on your shoulders, not because it is burdensome, but because it makes everything around you transparent, exposed, unmasked. You see through people, not in a judgmental way, but in a way that feels almost too intimate, like you've accidentally glimpsed pages from a diary you were never meant to read. And with this seeing comes an uneasy responsibility. You suddenly understand what people mean without them saying it. You sense the tension before it reaches the surface. You feel the disappointment they're hiding, the pressure they're enduring, the confusion they bury beneath their daily performances. And this emotional X-ray vision becomes both a gift and a weight. You feel the world more deeply than it feels itself, and that kind of sensitivity, that kind of clarity changes you. But awakening is not glamorous. It is disruptive. It unsettles your identity, challenges your attachments, confronts your illusions, and demands that you stop explaining yourself to people who only understand you through the lens of who you used to be. And while this new awareness expands your inner landscape, it quietly narrows your circle, because the more clearly you see, the harder it becomes to unsee, and the more honest you become with yourself, the less comfortable you feel in spaces built on denial, pretense, and emotional shortcuts. This is where the loneliness begins, not because you are alone, but because you can no longer lose yourself in the noise that once protected you from the truth. So you begin to walk through life differently, quietly, cautiously, like someone who has stepped through a hidden door into a world that looks the same, but feels entirely different. And the people around you notice the shift. They notice the way your silence deepens, the way your reactions soften, the way your eyes seem to hold something heavier, older, something they cannot name but instinctively sense. Some feel threatened by it, some feel drawn to it, some misunderstand it entirely, but very few truly comprehend it. because few have walked through their own, awakening deeply enough to recognize what yours looks like. And this leads you naturally, almost painfully, into the isolation, the space where the weight of seeing too much begins to settle into your bones. You find yourself pulling away, not out of bitterness, but out of necessity, because your mind becomes too loud, your emotions too vast, your intuitions too sharp to share casually. You sit in rooms filled with people and feel like a ghost, present, observant, but unseen in the ways that matter. Silence becomes your companion, not because you fear speaking, but because you understand that most people only listen to respond, not to understand. You find yourself editing your truth into diluted fragments, compressing your depth into something more digestible, more socially acceptable, more comfortable for others to receive, and every time you do, you feel a small fracture inside you, a tiny betrayal of your own becoming. You begin to understand why strong people don't explain themselves. It's not pride, not stubbornness, not superiority. It's exhaustion. It's the realization that explanation is a transaction where you give pieces of yourself away to people who haven't earned the right to hold them. It's the recognition that some truths cannot be carried by anyone except the one who lived them. And so you stop trying to be understood by those who listen through the filter of their fears, their insecurities, their expectations. Instead, you retreat into a quieter honesty, one that doesn't require permission or validation. And there is a moment, a defining moment, where isolation becomes strangely beautiful, not because you enjoy being alone, but because you begin to see the clarity that solitude brings. You begin to hear your own thoughts without interference, feel your emotions without distortion, recognize your patterns without shame. You begin to understand that loneliness is not the absence of people, but the absence of understanding. And sometimes understanding only arrives when the world grows quiet enough for you to hear yourself. You may remember a person, someone who always sensed too much, someone who moved through life like they were carrying invisible storms inside them. They would walk into a room and feel the tension before anyone spoke. They would offer kindness to people who mistook it for weakness. They would explain themselves to those who never truly listened. They would apologize for things that weren't their fault, simply to keep the peace. And over time their spirit grew tired, frayed at the edges, worn from trying to translate their depth into a language the world did not speak. Eventually, they stopped explaining, stopped justifying, stopped shrinking. They became quiet, not defeated quiet, but sovereign quiet, the quiet of someone who finally understood that their peace was worth more than anyone's approval. And in that silence, they became unshakable. And maybe you are starting to become that person, too, or maybe you always were, but only now beginning to realize it. But awareness, as profound as it feels, is never passive. It invites conflict, not the loud external kind that erupts in arguments or confrontations, but the quiet internal war between who you used to be and who you are becoming, between the part of you that still wants to be understood and the part that knows explaining yourself is another form of self-abandonment, between the instinct to speak and the instinct to stay silent, between the urge to intervene in the suffering you see and the quiet wisdom that reminds you not every fire can be put out by your hands. And so you find yourself in a delicate tension, standing at the crossroads of action and restraint, feeling the weight of moral choices pressing into your chest like fingerprints on a fogged window. You see someone hurting, repeating the same destructive patterns, spiraling in a loop of self-inflicted wounds, and everything in you wants to reach out, to pull them from the flames, to offer the clarity that saved you. But you hesitate because the truth whispers that people cannot be rescued from pain they still cling to, that awakening cannot be gifted, only earned. And this truth stings you with a kind of quiet sorrow. You feel the heaviness of knowing too much and the helplessness of knowing you cannot do much with it without trespassing into someone else's journey. The conflict grows sharper in relationships. You feel misunderstood for the silence you choose, misinterpreted for the boundaries you set, and judged for the distance you need. People accuse you of changing without realizing that change is the only thing keeping you sane. Accuse you of withholding without realizing that what you hold inside is too intricate for simple explanations. Accuse you of being cold when in reality you are simply exhausted from offering parts of yourself to people who only know how to take. And so you wrestle with guilt and clarity at the same time, with love and detachment, with empathy and self-preservation. You want to explain yourself, to justify your choices, to ease the discomfort your growth creates in others. But something inside you resists, something wiser, something deeper, something that understands that explanation often invites misunderstanding, and misunderstanding invites more explanation, forming a cycle that drains you until there's nothing left but resentment. And so, slowly, painfully, you begin choosing silence over justification, distance over distortion, truth over comfort. Even when it costs you relationships, even when it leaves you misunderstood, even when it leaves you alone. But deep awareness does not come without a price, and the price reveals itself in Part 6, the collapse, the moment when the weight of everything you've been carrying finally descends with full force. It doesn't happen all at once. It builds quietly, accumulating in the corners of your mind like dust on forgotten shelves, turning into a heaviness you don't notice until it becomes impossible to ignore. You begin feeling the world too intensely. The emotions of others cling to you like static electricity. The unspoken tension in a room feels like a storm pressing against your skin. The disappointment in someone's voice echoes in your chest long after the conversation ends, and your own thoughts become loud enough to drown out everything else. You start waking up tired, not physically, but spiritually, as if your mind has been running marathons in your sleep. You find yourself withdrawing, not because you want to, but because every interaction feels like another wave crashing onto a shore already eroding. Metaphors begin forming naturally inside you because reality itself starts feeling metaphorical. Life feels like standing in a crowded room where everyone is talking and you're the only one hearing the echoes behind the words. Your mind becomes a house with too many open doors, allowing every passing emotion to drift inside, leaving you overwhelmed by feelings that were never yours to carry. Your heart becomes a vessel filled beyond its capacity, sloshing with unexpressed grief, unspoken understanding, and unfiltered empathy. You feel like a glass so transparent that everyone's pain shines straight through you, like a sponge absorbing tensions that others release, without a second thought, like a lighthouse that sees every shipwreck but can save none of them. And eventually, inevitably, this emotional saturation reaches its breaking point. You start forgetting yourself, losing yourself, dissolving yourself in the sea of everything you perceive. You begin questioning whether your sensitivity is a blessing or a curse, whether seeing deeply is worth the cost of feeling deeply, whether awareness is illumination or erosion. Your mind becomes a swirling tide of insights and exhaustion, clarity and confusion, strength and fragility. You try grounding yourself, but the world feels slippery, unstable, shifting beneath your feet like sand pulled by an unseen current. You begin collapsing inward, not dramatically, not visibly, but quietly, like a star imploding under the pressure of its own brilliance, like a tree bending until its roots ache from holding everything together. And in that collapse, in that quiet implosion, you face the truth that every strong person eventually confronts, that your strength is not infinite, that your awareness can wound you if left unchecked, that your emotional depth requires boundaries or it becomes a flood, that your silence can protect you but can also suffocate you, that your empathy must be tempered or it will swallow you whole. You reach a point where explaining yourself feels impossible, where carrying others feels unbearable, where navigating your own mind feels overwhelming. And this is the moment, the painful, necessary breaking point, where something inside you begins to shift again, preparing you for the revelation that will follow, the wisdom that comes only after collapse, the transformation that emerges only when everything you thought you were has been stripped down to your core.